Chapter 1. The Charge I Couldn't Explain. I did not find a lipstick stain or a secret text. I found my debit card declined at a grocery store while my husband was building an exit fund I had never heard of. He told me I was too emotional to understand business, that I worked payroll, not real money. So I followed the numbers, and what I uncovered was a hidden company, fake consulting payments, and accounting edits made just days before a court subpoena. He believed he could walk into family court and walk out untouched. He underestimated two things: documentation and me. My name is Elena Navarro, and this is how I turned financial betrayal into documented revenge. April 2024, Charlotte, North Carolina. I audit payroll for a living. I never thought I would have to audit my own husband. My name is Isabel Marino. I am 38 years old, and I work as a senior payroll compliance analyst for a regional distribution company outside Charlotte. I spend my days reviewing W-2 forms, contractor classifications, and expense reimbursements. I know how hidden money moves. I know how business owners bury personal spending inside legitimate accounts. I just never expected to see it in my own kitchen. The envelope from Truist Bank was already opened. It was sitting on top of a stack of invoices from my husband's company, Caldwell Auto Detail. Nathan Caldwell owns 2 locations in Mecklenburg County, one off Independence Boulevard and another near Ballantyne. For 12 years, he handled the business. I handled our home. That was how we kept things simple. I should have set the envelope down. Instead, I glanced at the first line. $2,412 at South Park Jewelers. Below it, $731 at a boutique hotel in Savannah, Georgia. $96 at a florist in Uptown Charlotte. I did not breathe for a second. It was not my birthday, not our anniversary. We had not been to Savannah. Nathan walked into the kitchen, hair still damp from his shower, wearing the same relaxed smile he had worn for 12 years. I held up the statement. I have never seen this card before. Business card, he said instantly. Client entertainment. I looked back at the paper. Jewelry is client entertainment. High-value fleet contract, worth the investment. The hotel? Strategy retreat. Why Savannah? He shrugged lightly. People think better near the water. He did not hesitate. He did not stumble. He did not look guilty. If anything, he looked patient. I wanted to believe him. I really did. Marriage is built on the habit of believing the person across from you. But I process expense reports for a living. I know what legitimate business travel looks like. It does not look like a single hotel charge tied to a jewelry store and a florist within the same 48-hour window. I folded the statement and set it back down. 3 weeks later, my debit card was declined at Publix. The cashier tried again. Declined. There were 5 people behind me: a woman with 2 kids, a college student with frozen pizzas, an older man tapping his wallet against his palm. I could feel their eyes on my back. I smiled like it was a system error and handed over a credit card. That was the first time I felt embarrassed. When I got home, I logged into our joint Bank of America account. $15,200 had been transferred out to a business operating account I did not have access to. I stared at the screen longer than I should have. When Nathan walked in from the garage, I kept my voice calm. What was the 15,200 for? Equipment upgrade, he said, grabbing a bottle of water from the fridge. Pressure washing system. You know the one at Independence has been acting up. I had driven by both shops that Saturday morning. Same hoses, same faded signage, no new equipment in sight. You did not mention it, I said. He leaned back against the counter. I do not run every operational decision by you, Isa. You work payroll. You do not run a company. It was not loud, it was not cruel, it was dismissive. You wouldn't understand revenue timing, he added. Cash flow is complicated. I understood revenue timing very well. That night, I lay awake replaying the conversation. Maybe I sounded accusatory. Maybe I was stressed. Maybe I was looking for something that wasn't there. Gaslighting does not feel like shouting. It feels like slowly doubting your own competence. The next morning, before leaving for work, I opened my laptop and created a folder titled April 2024 Records. I downloaded the bank statement. I saved screenshots of the transfer. I noted the timestamp. I wrote down his explanations word for word. Not because I was certain, because numbers rarely lie. A week later, I drove past the Independence Boulevard again. I parked across the street and watched customers come and go. I told myself I was being dramatic. Businesses take time to install equipment. Orders get delayed. That night at dinner, Nathan mentioned he might need to travel more this summer. Savannah had been productive, he said. Which managers went with you? I asked. Tyler and Chris, he answered smoothly. You met them at the Christmas party. I had, and I knew Tyler had been in Charlotte that weekend. He had posted photos from his daughter's softball tournament on Instagram the same night the hotel charge cleared. I didn't bring it up. Instead, I logged into the joint account again before bed. Another transfer, $3,400, same operating account. It was not dramatic. It was incremental, careful. On a Thursday afternoon in late April, I found myself sitting in my car outside a gas station on Providence Road, engine off, phone in my hand. I scrolled through the statement again. Jewelry, hotel, flowers. Who receives flowers on a random Tuesday in April? The thought settled into my chest like something solid. When I got home, Nathan was washing his truck in the driveway. He looked up and smiled the way he always had, like I was still the safest part of his life. You look tired, he said. Long week. You worry too much, Isa. Everything is fine. He said it gently, comfortingly, as if my unease was simply my personality. That night, after he fell asleep, I stood in the hallway and outside our bedroom and listened to him breathe. For 12 years, I had trusted him with every shared account, every joint tax return, every financial decision that mattered. Now I felt something shifting, and I didn't know whether to trust my instincts or my marriage. Back in the kitchen, I opened my laptop again. I added another document to the folder. Dates, amounts, transfers, his explanations. I wrote down client entertainment. I wrote down equipment upgrade. I wrote down you wouldn't understand revenue timing. I was not thinking about divorce. Not yet. I was thinking about hidden money. I closed the laptop and turned off the light. For the first time in our marriage, I was not just a wife reviewing a statement. I was building a record. And somewhere deep down, I knew those records would matter far more than he realized. Chapter 2. Money Leaves Trails. By June, the house felt like a place I was visiting instead of living in. Nathan started coming home after 10 most nights. His truck headlights would sweep across the ceiling, then the engine would shut off, and I would hear the garage door close with that slow mechanical hum that suddenly sounded louder than it ever had before. His phone stayed face down on the counter. The passcode changed, face recognition disabled. One night, he handed it to me to look at a photo of a newly detailed BMW. It asked for a code. You changed your passcode, I said. He gave a quiet laugh. You checking up on me now? I am asking. You overthink everything, Isa. You work payroll. You do not run a company. Revenue timing is complicated. You would not understand how retained earnings work. It was smooth, calm, corrective. Gaslighting does not feel like being attacked. It feels like being gently repositioned as less informed. The next morning at work, I stared at a quarterly tax reconciliation and realized I was not reading it. I was thinking about marital assets. During lunch, I walked to HR and knocked on Megan Turner's door. She looked up from her screen. You look like you have a question, she said. Hypothetically, if someone suspected concealed income during a divorce, what would matter most? She did not smile. Documentation, timing, and classification. Business owners hide money through vendor accounts, payroll, or separate LLC structures, but money leaves trails. Always. Even if it is clean on paper? Especially then. I nodded. I did not tell her everything, but I felt steadier walking back to my desk. At home, I stopped reacting emotionally. I observed. Transfers continued. 3,000, 4,000, 1,500, always from the joint account to the operating account I could not access. Then, one night in late June, Nathan stepped outside to take a call and left his laptop open on the kitchen table. I did not hesitate. The screen was open to payroll software. I scanned automatically. Names, gross pay, federal withholding. Then I saw it. Brooke Lang, marketing consultant, $5,400. Monthly. I leaned closer. Direct deposit to a personal checking account in Charlotte. No EIN listed, just a social security number tied to a 1099 contractor classification. Nathan walked back inside. I did not move away from the screen. Who does Brooke Lang? Marketing consultant, he said evenly. She handles social growth. $5,400 a month? She drives revenue. I process payroll for a company twice the size of yours. That is executive-level contractor pay. He closed the laptop gently. Do not start drama over something you do not understand. Is it an affair? I asked quietly. He did not blink. That is insulting. Is it concealed income? You are being paranoid. He walked away. Later that night, I searched her name. 32 years old, marketing freelancer, Instagram filled with brunches, rooftop photos, and weekend trips. One picture from Savannah in April, the same weekend as the hotel charge. The bracelet on her wrist in one photo looked identical to the one from South Park Jewelers. I did not cry. I opened my laptop and created a new folder inside April 2024 records. Payroll discrepancies. I saved the screenshots I had taken in the seconds before he returned. In early July, I searched the North Carolina Secretary of State website. Caldwell Auto Detail LLC appeared first, filed 2013. Then another entity surfaced, Harbor Ridge Holdings LLC, filed March 14, 2022. I had never heard him mention Harbor Ridge. Registered agent was the same accountant listed on his business tax filings, mailing address, a post office box in Matthews. I checked the timeline of transfers. The first large transfer from our joint account had been April 2022, 1 month after Harbor Ridge was formed. This was not an emotional suspicion anymore. It was a structural pattern. Mid-August, he came home earlier than usual and placed an envelope on the counter between us. I filed for divorce, he said. The words were almost gentle. I opened the petition. 60-40 split in his favor. Income listed at $248,000 for 2024. I had been tracking deposits for months. That number did not match the volume of business flowing through his accounts. That is not your full revenue, I said. It is what is reportable. Reportable to whom? He leaned back in his chair. You do not understand business accounting. Gross deposits are not profit. You are confusing cash flow with income. I understand financial affidavits, I said, and I understand when income appears understated. He looked at me differently then, not annoyed, evaluating. Do not make this ugly, he said. Brooke is a consultant. There is no affair. You paid her $5,000 a month. That is market rate. For what deliverables? You are digging for something that is not there. No, I said, I am documenting what is there. That night, I printed everything. LLC filings for Harbor Ridge Holdings, payroll summaries with Brooke's name, bank statements showing transfers from our joint account, his divorce petition, his financial affidavit draft. I highlighted the income line, $248,000. If that were true, the operating margin would not support the transfers I was seeing. Patterns are not proof, he had said, but in court, patterns become evidence. By the end of August, the stack of paper required a binder. I labeled the spine with a black marker. Business income, payroll, transfers.
Not because I was certain of an affair, not because I was certain of fraud, but because I was certain of inconsistency. The house felt quieter after that, not peaceful, suspended. He believed I was reacting emotionally to a marriage that was ending. He did not realize I was preparing for discovery, and the more he insisted there was nothing to find, the more I understood that what he feared was not drama, it was disclosure.
Chapter 3. Discovery. By September, this was no longer about suspicion, it was about exposure. I met attorney Laura Bennett on the 18th floor of a steel and glass building overlooking downtown Charlotte. She was 61, calm in the way only someone with 3 decades of high-asset divorce litigation could be calm. She flipped through my binder slowly. Payroll screenshots, LLC filings, transfer logs, the draft financial affidavit Nathan had submitted to the court. "How long has the contractor been paid at that level?" she asked. 18 months. "And the holding company was formed when?" "April 2022. She nodded once. "Then we are not looking at coincidence. We are looking at asset concealment." Hearing it framed that way changed something inside me. Not betrayal, not drama, asset concealment. Laura outlined the next steps with clinical precision. Motion to compel full financial disclosure. Subpoena to all banking institutions associated with Caldwell Automotive Services. Production request for QuickBooks full audit logs. Demand for documentation supporting contractor compensation and intercompany transfers. "If there is concealed income," she said, "the audit trail will show timing discrepancies. Courts do not respond to emotion, they respond to inconsistency." I understood inconsistency. Within weeks, subpoenas were issued. Under North Carolina civil procedure, the banks had 30 days to comply. The production orders included tax filings, general ledgers, and all entities in which Nathan held ownership interest. That was when Daniel Reyes entered the picture. Daniel was a forensic accountant with experience testifying in cases involving tax exposure and financial fraud. He spoke quietly but saw everything. He sat across from me and asked, "Did he ever discuss restructuring income for tax purposes?" "No." "Did you ever sign operating agreements for a secondary entity?" "No." He typed for a few moments and rotated his screen toward us. Caldwell Automotive Services LLC was the primary business, but Pine Harbor Ventures LLC had been receiving structured transfers totaling $203,000 over 24 months. I felt my pulse steady rather than spike. "That is not operational expense," Daniel said. "That is staged distribution." We went deeper. Brooke Lang had been paid $5,400 per month as an independent contractor, W-9 on file, no written marketing scope, no performance reports, no invoicing documentation. "That is problematic," Daniel said. "If challenged, that classification could trigger tax exposure." Ryan Miller, Nathan's cousin, received $1,600 per month labeled administrative coordination, full-time employment elsewhere. Actual gross deposits for 2024 were $639,000. Reported income on the affidavit, $248,000. The gap was no longer arguable. 3 days before the subpoena was served, QuickBooks entries were edited. Daniel leaned forward. Revenue entries were reclassified, distributions shifted, but the audit log preserves the original timestamps. Editing accounting software does not erase history. Timestamped. That word felt like gravity. Nathan confronted me that night in the kitchen. "You brought in a forensic accountant. I brought in clarity. You are trying to build a fraud case. I am responding to your affidavit." His jaw tightened. "You are going to trigger a federal review. You triggered that when you moved money." He stepped closer. "You are going to take everything. I am asking for disclosure of marital assets." He laughed once, but it lacked confidence. "You do not even know how retained earnings work. I know when revenue is understated on a financial affidavit, and I know that perjury carries sanctions." The word perjury hung in the air.
2 days later, Ryan waited outside my office building. "We should not be dragging this through court," he said. "You should not have been on payroll. It was consulting. You sell cars full-time." He lowered his voice. "You are going to collapse the business." "I am not collapsing anything. I am responding to asset concealment." He looked at me differently then, less dismissive, more unsettled. During deposition prep, Laura outlined the stakes. If he denies control of Pine Harbor, we present transfer summaries. If he claims legitimate consulting, we request deliverables. If he minimizes revenue, we introduce bank deposit analysis. Failure to disclose fully could trigger court sanctions and potential tax referral. This was no longer a marital dispute. It was procedural escalation. In October, the court ordered amended financial disclosure within the statutory compliance window. His attorney requested an extension, citing accounting complexity. Laura shook her head. Complexity does not excuse omission. Daniel sent an updated report the following week. It highlighted a pattern. Transfers to Pine Harbor spiked in the month preceding the divorce filing. Owner distributions reclassified as retained capital. Revenue timing adjusted. "That is strategic understatement," Daniel said. "If reviewed by tax authorities, this could raise questions." Questions. That word carried more weight than accusation. One evening, Nathan stood in the bedroom doorway. "You are turning this into financial fraud." "I am turning it into evidence." "You are going to bring federal attention into this." "You did that when you assumed documentation could be rearranged without consequence." He stared at me for a long moment. "You were never supposed to understand this." That sentence told me more than any spreadsheet. By November, mediation was scheduled, but mediation requires transparency, and transparency requires production. Daniel forwarded a final audit summary. It mapped original revenue entries against edited entries, time-stamped changes highlighted in red. I read the file twice. This was no longer about Brooks' bracelet or Savannah weekends. It was about structured concealment, understated income, and exposure risk. Laura closed her folder after reviewing the latest report. "We are past guessing," she said quietly. "We're in proof territory now." The system had been engaged, and systems, unlike marriages, run on documentation.
Chapter 4. The Safe. January arrived with a kind of cold clarity I had not felt all year. 2 weeks before trial, Laura called and told me to come in immediately. When I stepped into her office, another woman was sitting across from her desk. 68, straight posture, silver hair cut blunt at the chin. Judith Caldwell, Ethan's mother. She had always looked at me as if I were auditioning for a role I would never fully earn. Polite, distant, measuring. She stood when I walked in. "I am not here to defend him," she said. Her voice was steady. Laura closed the door and gestured for me to sit. Judith folded her hands in her lap and looked at me directly. "He mentioned Crestline Holdings at Christmas," she said. "He called it his exit fund." The phrase struck harder than any bank statement ever had. Exit fund. For a moment, I did not see spreadsheets or affidavits. I saw 12 years of my life quietly categorized as temporary. "You are certain of the name?" Laura asked. Judith nodded. "He said he had structured it properly this time." This time. She took a slow breath. "In 1998, my husband hid revenue in a secondary account tied to his repair shop. I found out after the divorce decree. The court divided what was declared, not what was concealed. I will not watch that happen again." I studied her face. "You knew?" I asked softly. "I suspected," she said. "I did not know the numbers, but I recognized the tone, pride in outsmarting someone." Laura leaned forward. "Do you have access to documentation?" Judith hesitated only a second. "There is a safe in the old boat garage at the lake house in Mooresville. He keeps backup drives there." My pulse slowed instead of racing. "What is the combination?" Laura asked. Judith almost smiled. "His high school football number, 37. He uses it for everything. Always has."
All the complexity locked behind teenage nostalgia. With a court order authorizing inspection of shared marital storage, we drove to the property 2 days later. The air smelled like pine and cold water. The garage was cluttered with fishing rods and old life jackets. The safe was bolted into concrete behind stacked toolboxes. Daniel knelt and entered the numbers. 37, 37, 37. The lock released with a quiet, metallic click. Inside were 2 external drives and a slim binder labeled Backups. Daniel connected the first drive to his laptop, the screen filled with archived QuickBooks files dating back to early 2022. He opened one and scrolled. Revenue entries, transfers to Crestline Holdings, owner distributions categorized as capital reserve. Actual gross for 2024 exceeded $680,000, higher than what had already been disclosed. An internal note attached to one entry read, "Strategic reserve allocation prior to marital dissolution." I read it twice. Dissolution. He had not just planned separation, he had planned insulation. For a second, the room tilted slightly. When she said exit fund, I realized something colder than anger. I had never been the plan. I had been the placeholder. Judith watched my expression. "I did not raise him to do this," she said, quietly, "but I will not protect him from it." Laura asked carefully, "Are you prepared to testify under oath?" Yes. There was no drama in her answer, only decision. Back at the office, Laura drafted supplemental disclosures immediately. Crestline Holdings was added to the asset list, backup drives were cataloged, transaction summaries prepared for court. Under procedural rules, we amended the witness list. Ethan's attorney responded the next morning. We were unaware Mrs. Caldwell intended to testify. Laura read it aloud and looked at me. They assumed loyalty would override documentation. Arrogance creates blind spots. That evening, Ethan called. "You went to the lake house. With a court order. You involved my mother. She involved herself." He exhaled sharply. "You are humiliating this family. You wrote dissolution in your own ledger." Silence. "You are turning this into financial misconduct. I am responding to concealed assets. You think the judge will care about internal notes. I think the court will care about intent." His voice shifted, no longer dismissive. "You are going to trigger perjury exposure. You triggered that when you signed your affidavit." There it was. Fear. For the first time since April, something cracked in his tone. Not anger, not superiority, calculation unraveling. Trial week approached quickly. Mediation had collapsed under the weight of discrepancies. Too much understatement, too much exposure risk, too much potential tax liability if federal scrutiny followed. Laura reviewed stepdemony strategy. Daniel establishes discrepancy. You establish timeline. Judith establishes intent and knowledge. Combined, that creates pattern. But this was no longer just pattern. It was documented concealment. The night before trial, I stood in our bedroom and looked at the closet that still held both our clothes. The house felt like a stage set waiting for its final act. Ethan stood in the doorway. "You could have walked away with a clean split." "I was never offered a clean split." "You are taking everything I built." "I built it on concealment." He stared at me, searching for something to counter that. He did not find it. "You think this ends well for you." "It ends accurately." He did not respond. I laid my navy suit on the bed, the same one I wore to my first executive compliance presentation years ago. Structured, unadorned. Not for victory, for credibility. In the morning, we would walk into a courtroom where spreadsheets carried more weight than sentiment, where a mother would testify about an exit fund, where backup drives would speak louder than explanations, and he still believed he would walk out smiling.
Chapter 5. Karma is documented. The morning of the hearing felt unnaturally calm. Family Court, Mecklenburg County, February 2025. The hallway outside the courtroom buzzed softly with attorneys and clients pretending not to study one another. Ethan stood near the window with his lawyer, posture straight, expression composed. If someone had walked by without context, they would have assumed this was a routine contract dispute. He still believed he would walk out smiling. Inside, the courtroom lights were bright but unforgiving. Judge Karen Whitfield took her seat, glasses resting low on her nose, reputation well established in cases involving asset concealment and incomplete financial disclosure. Our case was called. Ethan's attorney opened with measured confidence. Business volatility, expansion planning, retained earnings, contractor flexibility. The tone suggested complexity rather than concealment. Ethan nodded occasionally, as if reinforcing a narrative he had rehearsed for months. Then Laura stood. She did not match their tone. She dismantled it. She began with deposit summaries, structured transfers from Caldwell Automotive into Pine Harbor Ventures and Crestline Holdings, owner distributions reclassified just weeks before the divorce filing, reported income of $248,000 against actual deposits exceeding $670,000. Daniel Reyes was sworn in. He explained the forensic review clearly: original QuickBooks entries, subsequent edits, audit log preservation, timestamps 3 days before subpoena service. Judge Whitfield leaned forward slightly. "You are stating that revenue was reclassified prior to production?" "Yes, Your Honor," Daniel replied. "The software retains original data. The edits are traceable." A faint shift ran through the courtroom, not loud, not dramatic, but noticeable. Ethan's fingers, resting on the table, tightened around a pen. Laura then called Judith Caldwell. Ethan did not look at his mother as she walked to the stand. "Mrs. Caldwell," Laura began, "did your son discuss Pine Harbor Ventures or Crestline Holdings with you?" "Yes." "How did he describe them?" Judith's voice was steady. "He called it his exit fund." For a brief second, the room felt suspended. Laura introduced the internal memo recovered from the backup drive, strategic reserve allocation prior to marital dissolution. Judge Whitfield read the line slowly. Ethan's attorney attempted to soften the implication. "Mrs. Caldwell, could this have been normal business planning?" Judith did not waver. "I have lived through concealed income in my own divorce. I know the difference between planning and hiding." For months, he had spoken over me. In that courtroom, he did not speak at all. When Judge Whitfield addressed Ethan directly, her tone was measured but firm. "Mr. Caldwell, this court requires complete and accurate financial affidavits. The discrepancies presented today raise concerns of asset concealment and potential perjury exposure." The word perjury did something visible. The faint curve of confidence at the edge of his mouth disappeared. He shifted in his seat, eyes dropping to the table. Not anger, not outrage, calculation collapsing. The judge ordered immediate amendments of the financial affidavit and directed that documentation be transmitted for review regarding possible tax liability and financial misconduct. She then delivered her ruling. 70% of marital assets awarded to me. Primary residence retained in my name. Pine Harbor Ventures and Crestline Holdings frozen pending review. Financial records forwarded for tax audit evaluation. No applause, no dramatic gasp, just orders entered into record. When it was over, Ethan stood slowly. For a man who had built his identity around control, he looked briefly unmoored. He avoided eye contact as he gathered his files. Outside the courtroom, February air cut sharp against my lungs. There were no cameras waiting, no public spectacle. Justice had not been theatrical. It had been procedural. 6 weeks later, the certified letters arrived. An IRS audit notice addressed to Ethan Caldwell, a contractor classification review sent to Brooke Lang, an income discrepancy inquiry directed to Ryan Miller. Karma did not arrive with sirens. It arrived in envelopes, in scheduled examinations, in federal review codes printed in black ink. One evening in March, I stood alone in the kitchen where this had started. The memory of my debit card being declined at the grocery store felt distant but clear.
That humiliation had been the first signal, not of betrayal, of underestimation. He had assumed I would react emotionally and stop there. He had not anticipated documentation. He once told me I was too emotional to understand business. What he did not understand is that clarity is not loud. It is persistent. If you have ever been told you were too sensitive to question numbers, too dramatic to look deeper, I would genuinely like to hear your story. Financial betrayal rarely begins with shouting. It begins with subtle inconsistencies. If this story resonated with you, stay here. There are more stories about divorce, asset concealment, financial betrayal, and the quiet kind of revenge that unfolds in courtrooms and audit letters. Because in the end, karma is not chaos. It is documented.